What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Time to show you the juice from Lake Eufaula. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of juice. It was a pretty tough tournament. You know, I only got a few bites each day, but I want to show you the key rods, reels, line, baits, all that good stuff. Help me catch a few bass on a tough Lake Eufaula. It's all coming up. Well, guys, you know it was a pretty tough tournament, and a little bit of everything going on, so it kind of spread the field out, spread the fish out. It was hard to really dial anything in. And going into the tournament, I knew Lake Eufaula was a brush pile lake, so I spent most of my time scanning around the lake looking for brush piles. You know, I went and pre-practiced and marked a bunch of brush piles then as well, so I just kind of checked up on them during practice. And I found a few new ones, found which ones had some fish in it. You know, the Lowrance units are so good that you could see if there's fish in a brush pile and really even see how big they are. So once I found all those, you know, getting them to bite was a whole nother question. You know, I had this deck loaded up with rods. You know, I probably had 20 rods out on the deck, all different baits, trying different things, whatnot. But I got a few bites on a few key baits, and I decided during the tournament to really just focus on throwing those baits. You know, I knew they worked, I knew they were catching fish, and it was more of just a timing deal than a bait thing. So I just stuck with a few baits that I had a lot of confidence in and just kind of rotated through them, rotated through the brush piles with those same baits, and eventually you would get one to bite. You know, it was very frustrating and very tough, but we managed to catch 5 per day and finish up 62nd place, so not too shabby. So my primary weapon of choice was this guy right here. That's my favorite Hex series rod, 7.6 heavy. Favorite Soleus XCS reel, 8.1 to 1. I wanted a fast gear ratio to catch up to those fish whenever I set the hook, and they come running at you. Right here we got 20-pound Seaguar Tatsu fluorocarbon. I wanted some heavy line in case they tangled me up in those brush piles. And then went this right here. This is a 1/2 ounce Dirty Jigs Scott Canterbury flipping jig. Just a good all-around jig. It's probably one of my favorite jigs to throw around, and just came through the brush very well. I'm not even sure what color this is. Might be green pumpkin craw, something like that. But the key was having a good trailer, and I was using this right here. This is the Guggen Kraken Craw. Now I got a variety of different colors here, and I would actually switch up the color trailer based on the water clarity. You know, mid-lake or towards the bridge in Lake Eufaula, the water was a little dirtier, but as you got closer to the dam, the water cleared up. So rather than changing the whole color of the jig, I like to keep the same color jig and then just change up my trailer. So probably my number one go-to trailer is this guy right here. It's called the Natural color. It's just a beautiful color, and it just looks so natural in the water. You know, see what they did there? They named it Natural because it looks natural. So I was just rigging this Kraken Craw up on the back of my jig. I wanted a fairly big profile because these fish were eating big stuff. They're eating big bluegill, big shad, big crayfish, and if, you know, I wanted to entice a big fish. So that right there is probably my number one bait of choice at Lake Eufaula. This probably caught the most fish for me, and definitely caught my bigger ones right there. So after the jig, you know what I learned in practice, this let me back up and backtrack a little bit why I started with the jig, Because what I was learning in practice is I would pull up on these brush piles and I would throw a moving bait, whether it be a swim bait, a crankbait, spinner bait, something big and moving over these brush piles and bring it through it, and the fish weren't really ready to commit. So they would follow those baits back out of the brush pile to the boat, and then you're not able to catch them. So I would start with the jig, because those fish are tucked in that brush pile, and if they're gonna react, they're gonna eat that jig. You know, so I'd give them a few casts with that jig, and then I would pick up a swim bait and see if anything wanted to react to a swim bait that wouldn't react to the jig. But at least I've already fished that brush pile with a jig, so if one was gonna eat a slower bait, he ate that before he followed my swim bait out and wasn't in the brush pile anymore. So it was just kind of being efficient and figuring out those little tips and tricks to just make yourself the most efficient on the water fishing those brush piles. Because once a fish follows your bait out of the brush pile, he's not going to bite. And you know, it may take him a few minutes to settle back into that brush pile, and that's no good. That's not what we want. So like I said, after I would throw the jig in there a few times, I would take one of these right here. This is the Guggen Saucy Swimmer, the 4.8 inch version. Now again, I used a couple different colors of this bait. This green gizzard was when I was a little bit closer to the dam and that clear water. As I would work up to the dirtier water, I would switch to the white pearl color, just because it's a little bit brighter and you know, a little bit easier for them to see in the dirtier water. So big key to a swim bait right here is the Bass Cave Tackle Screw Lock Deadhead. I was throwing the 4.8 inch Saucy Swimmer on this right here, which is the 3/8 6/0 Screw Lock Deadlock. No, Screw Lock Deadhead, I'm sorry. So you rig that bait up on there like that, get it to the screw lock, and you start spinning the head, tuck the tail over to follow. So then you're gonna screw your bait all the way up on this jig head here. And once you get it up there, that bait is locked on there. You cannot pull that head off of that screw lock, so it's locked on. You're gonna catch more fish and save time on the water using those Bass Cave Tackle Screw Lock Deadheads. So I was throwing this on 15-pound Seaguar Invisx. I wanted the 15-pound line to help keep the bait down. You know, I was throwing a 3/8 ounce, so it's not that heavy. I wanted to keep that bait down in the water column so you could, you know, hit the right areas on those brush piles. And I went with the favorite Rush series rod for the swim bait. You know, this is a 7'3" heavy, so it's a little bit shorter rod, but it's still a heavy action. You can really muscle those fish out. And then, you know, of course, we got the favorite Soleus XCS reel on there. I went with the 7.3 to 1 gear ratio on my swim bait, just because I wanted a little bit slower, so I wasn't moving the bait too fast and rising it up in the water column. So that's pretty much my go-to swim bait setup right there. And that caught me a few key fish. I believe it caught me my biggest fish of the tournament, actually, on day 2. I was able to catch a nice one on the swim bait. Caught a few on it day 1 as well, but that was my secondary bait. You know, like I said, I throw the jig first most of the time and then pick up the swim bait and follow up with that. Again, like I said, I had rods all over the deck, different baits. I caught a few on a shaky head as well, but those 2 baits and rods right there are what got the majority of my work done at Lake Eufaula. So that's the juice right there. That's the rod, reel, line, bait. That's everything I used to cash me a small check at Lake Eufaula. So appreciate you guys watching this video. Hopefully you learned something. Leave me any likes and comments down below. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And we'll see you guys next time.